From once being considered one of the biggest and scariest German football threats to now fighting relegation, today we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of Turbine Potsdam. Potsdam is a club that broke and set many German football records. They were also home to multiple World Cup winners and were also involved in building one of the biggest Bundesliga rivalries to date. However, they currently find themselves struggling at the bottom of the table with only 1 point. The two-time Champions League winners are also in extreme financial and internal crisis. So how did this happen? Let's talk about it. Potsdam was first established in 1971 and also played their first professional game in May of that year. Ex-professional goalkeeper Bernd Schroeder, who is going to be a very important figure in this story today, was set to be their head coach. In 1983 and 1984, they won the JDR Championship back-to-back. The political state in Germany was not the easiest to have players come in and play for you or travel within Germany itself, which did put a fair amount of obstacles in the way of the club and how they wanted to build. In 1989, they continued the journey and won their 6th championship. Creeping into 1990, the Frauen Bundesliga was established. However, it was slightly different to what we know it today. It was two different divisions or two different groups where you had the South Bundesliga and the North Bundesliga. However, Potsdam was not able to clinch qualification at that time. Schroeder, their head manager, stepped down from being a coach and wanted to take more kind of a presidential role a little bit off the field, which seemed to work pretty good as they were able to get into the Bundesliga in the 1993-94 season. But even with a lot of celebrations, they had a disastrous start, losing their first game 11-0 and kind of struggling to really put a stamp in the Frauen Bundesliga. And that's when Schroeder was like, you know what, I need to take back that managerial role, and was appointed as the head coach again in 1997. That was also the year, 1997, that the Frauen Bundesliga was formed into the Bundesliga that we know now, and it was combined the two divisions or the two groups into that one single tier league that we know today. But to be able to play in that single tier division, teams needed to finish in the top 4, but there are also playoffs for the top 5. Now, Potsdam finished 5th in their championship and actually got a Bundesliga spot in a playoff game. So during that time, that 1998, Potsdam getting into the Bundesliga was going to be a start of an incredible decade story that was going to mark a ton of success and silverware for this incredible club. The last season in the 19th century cemented what was going to be one of the biggest rivalries between Potsdam and Frankfurt. The two hit face during a league game where Frankfurt was leading 4-0 at the half. However, Potsdam came back in the second half and drew the game 4-4. In fact, in 2002, Potsdam had the chance to grab their first ever silverware. But to do that, they had Frankfurt standing in their way. Frankfurt was 2 points ahead of them, and this was going to be the last match day of the league. So obviously, if you do a little bit of math, Potsdam had to win. They could not draw, they could not lose. You had to get those 3 points to win. This game also had 8,000 people in attendance, which was the biggest crowd during that time back in 2002. And obviously, to add a little bit more drama to that game, Potsdam scored in the 90th minute. However, that goal was ruled offside and Frankfurt went on to draw the game, claim the point, and win the league, which pretty much went on for the next 2 or 3 years. That was the script. Frankfurt consistently finishing first, winning the league, and Potsdam just a few points behind them, and often losing those games to Frankfurt themselves. However, that script was altered in 2004, where Potsdam beat Frankfurt 7-2 to ultimately win their first ever Bundesliga title. This also gave him qualification into the Women's UEFA Cup, which is now known as the Champions League. For the next few years, it was pretty much silverware followed by more silverware as they were able to win 5 Bundesliga titles, 4 of which came consecutively. During that incredible run, they won the Champions League twice, once in 2005 and then in 2010 again. They ultimately lost a very close final in 2011, but 2011 was also the year that they last saw any silverware after capturing the Bundesliga title. In fact, since then, it's only ever been Wolfsburg and Bayern to win the league, which is going to be quite important in our conversation. For the next few years, they were still kind of considered to be somewhat big competition, often finishing in the mid-table, in the top 5 here and there, up until 2015, where Schroeder had to retire. Again, the same gentleman that had been with them since their first ever kick of the ball. He took a club from nothing to something, winning big. I mean, he started off as recruiting track and field runners to be on the team, to going on having some very legendary figures in his team. World Cup winners. If he didn't have a coaching role on the field, he was often in the presidential role, and so this man leaving the club was obviously going to be it was going to put the club in a position that they've never been in. They started missing out on the Champions League. They started kind of dropping slowly but surely in that table. Now, during that time, there was a big revolution of how the hell were we going to run this Bundesliga? How were we going to finance it? How do you really want to make it this kind of big, legitimized league? And the biggest answer to that was obviously a lot of these clubs partnering up and being financially supported by their male counterparts, leaving a few other clubs to have to either sell or strike a deal with some other financing body. And ultimately, the clubs that were independent were going to struggle a little bit. The German Federation saw and said that this was the right step, a step in the right direction, because these male counterpart clubs had financial support, facilities that the women could use, and obviously a ready-made fan base. And so this kind of does give us an understanding of why Bayern Munich and Wolfsburg are currently, or have been dominating for, I want to say, the last 7 or 8 years at the top of the league. There were clubs that were financially supported and came in and kind of like wrecked whichever independent team was actually doing good, like Frankfurt and Potsdam. In fact, all top 16 European men's team have a women's counterpart club that they're spending money on, or at least financially supporting. Potsdam was clearly falling behind. They were lacking behind. And then Hertha, a German club from the men's first division, struck a deal with them in 2020, which is only about 2 years ago. It was a collaborative deal that included financial support and was supposed to last for 3 years. However, only last month in November, Hertha actually said that they wanted to renegotiate the contract and pretty much terminate it, as they wanted to now officially launch their own women's team that was going to compete in the Bundesliga in 2024-2025 season. You're not really seeing that money be reflected very well at Potsdam. Again, it was a team that was not winning titles. They were not even competing for titles, let alone winning. And seeing the rise in German football, especially after the Euros, if they have the money and if they have the facilities, why would they not start their own team? So this absolutely made sense for Hertha, but it was completely shattering for Potsdam, who were still independent. But let's talk a little bit about the president's and Potsdam situation after Schröder retiring in 2005. Katzmuth, an ex-Olympian champion who had been with the club since they started with different positions, was elected to be president and was so for the next few years up until last month. The club was regressing and declining. Tabea Kimi, a name that some of you might be familiar with, an ex-Gunner, an ex-Arsenal player actually, a German international, who played for Potsdam for 10 years, saw the fact that this club was basically going into ruins and ran for election for that presidential spot in 2021, but lost a very, very close, narrow poll. She wasn't too happy about it. Majority of the fan base didn't seem too happy about it. They saw that Katzmuth wasn't really doing anything much with the club. They needed a change, and she was a person who recognized, she had spent 10 years on the field with that team. She had captained them. She had won those leagues. She had won those Champions League trophies. It kind of looked like a sensible person to take on that kind of spot. Somebody who knew what to do with the club. She had pretty good visions, and it was pretty weird how she lost the election, really. And she was very open about her main goal, and her main really vision was she wanted to get Potsdam back on the big stage. She said this is a club that needs to be playing in the Champions League. That kind of left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. They had a very poor transfer window, and it looked like that club was in dire situations. That is the best way and the nicest way I can say it. They were loaning out players. They were claiming players on loan that they didn't really need. They had a spell of different coaches. It really looked like there was no vision for the club, really. They were kind of in survival mode and are currently in survival mode even as we continue speaking. When they kicked off the season after 6 games and only claiming 1 point, they sacked their coach. And then only 5 days later, Katzmuth steps down from being president. Now, this was obviously big news. The last thing a club wants to go through is not only your manager being sacked, but then your president stepping down in the space of 5 days after you've just kicked off the season and you're clearly struggling. You had a poor transfer window. In the last 6 games, you've only claimed 1 point. You're sitting at the top of the table. It was an absolutely just horrifying event for that club. And this actually kind of infuriates me, because if Katzmuth obviously didn't have any vision or clearly wasn't doing much with the club, why run for presidential? Tabea Kimi is a person that I probably would have voted for if I was in that fan base. She had visions. Why would you go into that role and put this club in the situation that you've put it and then step down? It's just terrible management. Some really unfortunate people in the big seat that should have not been in the big seat. And this has ultimately left Potsdam still at the bottom of the table with only 1 point, a ton of internal conflicts, and really not a stable body to support them. They can't support themselves financially, and they remain to be the only independent club in the Bundesliga, which is a conversation that is really interesting to have. Is, are independent clubs not able to survive in the women's game? Do they need to have male counterparts? Do they need to have financial bodies to support them? And this is not to say, oh, let's go back to the independent days where we were lacking money in the game. This is not what I'm saying, but it's an important question to kind of ponder on. Is this how the game will continue to be if we see more growth? Will it change? Will we be able to see independent teams thrive against those that are financially being supported? Financial support is crucial when it comes to transfer windows. That's how the big teams are able to kind of thrive and compete, is because they can pay those wages and they can pay those transfer. If you Google Potsdam, you still have Schroeder sitting as the head coach and you still have Kat Smuts as the president, even though that man is out. He is gone. There's not many people talking about their rise or their downfall, and I think even if a club is having a downfall, it's important to have these meaningful conversations because we get to reflect on how the game has changed. This is a club that was thriving 10, 20 years ago, was founded 50 years ago, one of the oldest, and had paved the way for a lot of German players. It had paved the way for a lot of German clubs. What happens next? I think relegation would be important. I think once they're able to drop into that second tier, it would give them time to think about the goals. Do they want to sell the club? Do they want to strike a deal? Financially, what are they going to do? Who are the people that they need to appoint? That is extremely important. You need to have people that trust the club. They need to have a vision with the club. Tabea Kimi is, I think, a person that would do very good in this role, considering she is a person who played for that club for 10 years. She captained them, somebody who's been through it all. And ultimately, they need somebody who trusts the process, because if you don't really believe in that club and you don't really believe in the history of that club, then I'm afraid it's not going to be very bright futures for Potsdam, and I'm afraid they will likely not see the top, not even the top of the Bundesliga. I mean, hell, if they can stay in the Bundesliga, that'd be an accomplishment within itself, but if we're being frank and honest, that's pretty unlikely. So anyway, I want to hear your opinions on this. What do you think about independent clubs? What do you think could have contributed to a fall of a club like this? And most importantly, I want to know if you knew about Potsdam and their rise and fall, because when I was having conversations with people, they seemed to not have a clue about it. And they were like, yeah, Potsdam, what happened to them? And it's like some pretty unfortunate events in the last 5 years. Not even in the last 5 years, in the last month or two. I mean, holy. Also, I just wanted to show that I'm wearing a retro Germany shirt. This actually is a 2011 shirt, and I thought it was great to wear for this occasion because Potsdam won their last bit of silverware in 2011. They're a German team, and this is a Germany jersey in a 2011 version. It's perfect. It actually does have the 3 stars. I know Germany have 4 stars on their logo now, but it's 3 now. Actually, if you can guess whose shirt I'm wearing, let me know down in the comments. I'd be pretty interested to see if you know. He's a pretty big name. A player that I was a fan of. But anyway, as always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, and make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube, because why not? I'm going to be pumping out very fun and interesting content like this, so you'll be thoroughly entertained. Anyway, I will see you later.